Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hosanna. My beloved, we're studying the prophetic books of the Bible, and we are specifically dissecting the book of Daniel, and we are approaching the end of it, believe it or not, and it is chapter 11 where Angel Gabriel is speaking with Daniel and telling him what is going to happen, what is prophesying to him about his future and the future of his nation Israel, and what will happen in the years to come for a period of 400 years, where he says that in these 400 years, nations and empires are going to rise. He specifically zoned on the Greek Empire that is ran by Alexander the Great. We talked about that in extreme detail in previous episodes, and that now Alexander the Great has died and his kingdom is divided into 4 parts. And according to the 4 directions or the 4 winds of heaven, and specifically zoning in the kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south. And we said that the kingdom of the north occupied mostly Syria, and that the kings that occupied the north were called the Seleucid or the Seleucid dynasty. And then the kingdom of the south, and that was the south kingdom that occupied mostly Egypt, and that we were talking about, those were the Ptolemies, and after that came the Antioch. So these were the kings, and every so often there would be war between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And guess what? The people of Israel were stuck in the middle, and most of the time Palestine and Israel was land where this fight took over. So look with me, if you will, onto chapter 11 and start at verse 5. The king of the south. So now Archangel Gabriel is talking about the specific king of the south. That means those Greek empires that looked over the Egyptian nation. The king of the south will become strong, but one of his commanders will become even stronger than he and will rule after his own kingdom with great power. Verse 6, after some years they will become allies. The daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance, but she will not retain her power, and he and his power will not last. In those days, the angel says, she will be handed over with her royal escort and her father and the ones who supported her. And now I don't want to bore you with so much detail, but I want to tell you that history says exactly what happened. And I have an excerpt taken from one of the history books that speaks specifically about this book, the book of Daniel. And it talks about this third king, the king of the north, the king of Syria, who called himself Antiochus. And he decided to make a treaty with the king of the south. And as I said before, when kings made treaties between wars, they used to use the daughters as part of this peace treaty. He would give his daughter to marriage to the king or to the king's son. In this situation, it was to the king. So he decided to make a treaty with the king of the south and marry the daughter of the king of Egypt. And by the way, in case you wanted to go and look into references, the daughter's name was Bernice. However, there was one thing that is left out, that was not mentioned in this detail, and the fact that this king was already married. Yes, history tells us that that king who was going to marry the daughter of the south, the king of Egypt, Bernice, that king who was about to marry her, he was already married. Well, you can say no problem. Fine, let's see what happened. He divorced his wife, and he married the daughter of the Egyptian king anyway. So he got rid of his wife and he divorced her and he married Bernice. Of course, the wife of this king, she was not a happy camper. And how could she be when her king left her to marry another younger girl? Now, the wife of Antiochus, that's the king, didn't like that. So she murdered his new wife. By the way, she poisoned her. She murdered his new wife, and she murdered all her attendants. And that's exactly what's happened, as was mentioned by the angel. Guess what did the king do at that time when he came back and he saw that Bernice and all her fellow people had been poisoned, he took his wife back. So he said to her, "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I have done something wrong. I am in love with you again, and I want to marry." And he took her back to be his. Of course, what did the wife do? History tells us that as soon as they were married, she poisoned him. And that's the story of Bernice. And it's all written here before us, 300 years before it happened by the angel. Just as the verse said in the Bible, verse 6, everybody involved was killed. The king's daughter, all of her attendants, the king himself who did the treaty, and the whole peace treaty was blown away. And then what happened? Let's read the text. One from her family line in verse 7, the angel continues to say, will arise on to take her place. That's the place of Bernice who was killed. He will attack the forces of the king of the north and enter his fortress. He will fight against them and he will be victorious. He will seize their gods. Those are, of course, the man-made gods, the Greek gods, their metal images, their valuables, their articles of silver and gold, and carry them off all to Egypt. And that's indeed, my beloved, what happened in history and in years to come. The brother of the murdered Egyptian princess, that's her King Bernice, as in verse 7 it says, one from her family line, he started another war with the king of the north. And so Egypt, I don't want to bore you with so much history, but Egypt and Syria were at war all the time. They kept hanging on to each other's throats all the time. Back to verse 9. Here we read about the king of the north again. Then the king of the north will invade the realm of the king of the south, and they will retreat to his own country. So after he went, he retreated back, and then his sons will prepare a war. And the angel goes on to tell him, assemble a great army which will sweep on like an irresistible flood and carry the battle as far as the fortress. And that's what exactly is mentioned in the history books detailing the war between Egypt and Syria. Verse 11, then the king of the south, now this time the king of the south is the one who is marching out in rage and wanting to fight the king of the north, who will raise a large army and it will be defeated. So the angel is telling him that that is going to happen. When the army is carried off in verse 12, the king of the south will be filled with pride and will slaughter many thousands, yet he will not remain triumphant. Yes, my beloved, let's be weary of the sin of pride. Before destruction comes pride. Many a times in the book of Daniel we read and we learn that pride is a destroyer of great nations, of great wealth, of great businesses. It is always the beginning of the fall, as it happened with Lucifer, the Archangel. When that sin came into his heart, he was cast out of the kingdom of heaven. So it will be with proud people. Again, verse 13 goes on to say, for the king of the north will muster another army larger than the first, and after several years he will advance with a huge army. And the angel goes on to say about more details about fights between the kingdom of the south and kingdom of the north. Verse 16, the invader, in verse 16 of chapter 11, we read that Daniel is describing what the angel is telling him what is going to happen. The invader, that's the king that's coming to invade, is going to do as he pleases. No one will be able to stand against him, and he will establish himself in the beautiful land. Yes, Daniel always looks upon his land where the temple lies, and he names it again the beautiful land. God looks upon the earth and he sees places where there is real worship, churches and church congregations, monasteries, people worshiping, and those are beautiful in his sight. And they should be too in your sight, the place of worship. Love your place of worship. and be a servant in your place of worship. Verse 17, he talks about an alliance that will happen. Look at this. He, that's the king that's coming to fight, he will determine with the might of his entire kingdom what will make an alliance with the king of the south. And I'm going to slow here because that part involves most of us who have been living in Egypt. He will make an alliance with the king of the south, and we will give him a daughter in marriage in order to overthrow the kingdom, but his plans will not succeed and will not help him. Yes, who is this daughter that was given in marriage? As you can see in the picture before you, this was none but Cleopatra, the Queen Cleopatra. Antiochus at that time wasn't happy with his victories. He was determined to put Syria and Egypt together. What did he do? He decided to give the king of Egypt his daughter, and that was Cleopatra. His daughter was a very desirable woman, as history says. The king had hoped to put a spy in the Egyptian palace so he can know what's happening in Egypt and take power over it. Somebody to be on his side. But however, the plan did not work. The plan was thwarted. Why? Because the daughter, that's Queen Cleopatra, as history tells us, she actually fell in love with the Egyptian king, and she forgot about his father, who was very, very angry and came and onto the Egyptian king, and then he turned, as in verse 11 you read, that he turned his attention to other kings. Verse 19, after this he will turn back towards the fortress of his own country, but will stumble and fall and will not be seen again. And indeed, we never hear of this king again. Verse 20, his successor, that means the king that comes after him, another Antiochus, will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendor. So this man is going to go out and collect money and collect taxes. In a few years, he too was destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. And it appears from history that he had a deadly pestilence, a deadly disease, and has passed. We'll stop at verse 20 here, and we will see that every aspect of history that was prophesied by Archangel Gabriel took place. Specifically, the details surrounding these two daughters that were given in marriage as parts of treaties of peace between the kingdom or the nation or the power of the north and the power of the south. Today we spoke about two important historic details, and they were fulfilled exactly as was written in the book of Daniel. The details that are from verse 5 to verse 7 about Queen Bernice and what happened with her and how she was poisoned, she and all her mistresses and even her husband and her father. And then we talked about the details of Queen Cleopatra, and this was the queen that came and married the Egyptian king. He was one of the Ptolemies, and if I remember, it's Ptolemies number 4, and he married her, and she did not take the secrets of Egypt back to her father Antioch, who was angry with her, and his plans did not succeed. And after them, two other Antiochs came ruling over the kingdom of Egypt. We'll stop here at verse 20, and we'll pick up at verse 21 next time you come. Until we meet in next episode of Hosanna, my beloved, and have a great day.